Good morning, everybody. Turin. As I was putting this together, I was thinking to myself, now, why did I choose Turin rather than Milan? So there is a straying into Milan, not so much in terms of the architecture, but in terms of the artists, because as I discovered, most of them actually trained at the Brera Fine Arts Academy. Some of you might have been to Milan and to visited the famous Brera Gallery, renowned really for its Renaissance art, not for its modernist art. By modernist, I mean works that date to around 1900. But then I remembered that there was a very good reason for choosing Turin, and that is the exhibition of 1902, which rather than Paris 1900, which is always described as the apogee of Art Nouveau Jugendstil, as you're going to discover, I'm going to make a very good argument that really the whole high point for the entire movement across all of Europe and even beyond was the great exhibition held in Turin in 1902. We have one very distinctive Art Nouveau architect in Turin, and I am showing you his most famous building. Some people say that this is basically defines Liberty style in Italy. It's by Fenoglio. You'll see how you spell it later, but I promise you, in this instance, my pronunciations are not too bad because when I've worked in Turin, I've been working with a local guide, which has in itself been most entertaining in the sense that he was discovering Art Nouveau in Italy alongside me, as this is still very much, I think, what you and I would call a niche topic. Most people go to Italy for the Renaissance or the Baroque. They do not go to Italy in search of Liberty style. And the good news is Liberty is given very good coverage in my book. So as my book's not too expensive, hopefully this might encourage you. So there's good sections on both Turin and on Milan. So this is just to remind you that at this stage, we are still looking at a very divided Italy, and also an Italy that feels very threatened by its neighbours. So you have a map of Italy there, 1815, that's just after Napoleon, and you can see the fragmentation of Italy, and that the area that we are looking at, Piedmont, was actually technically Sardinia in terms of the title of the king. Charles Albert, or Charles Albert, was king of Sardinia and Piedmont. He's very important in our story because Charles Albert was the father of Victor Emmanuel, who is the first king of a united Italy. So try to remember how fragmented Italy was. So Piedmont, capital is Turin. The second most important city there is Genoa. I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, not talk about Genoa, but highlight the fact that the most important Liberty art gallery is ironically in Genoa. And you can also see that at this stage, Piedmont ate into what you and I would think of as France. You can see that Nice is part of Piedmont. And in fact, the territory known as Savoy, which is on my map of 1848 and is marked in green, takes you right up into modern day Switzerland. So can you see how it's entitled King of Piedmont and Sardinia? Corsica, of course, is to confuse with French. Lombardy and Milan and the Veneto, just here, was very much sort of being watched over all the time by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which I put up there for you to see just how it extended south into what was previously Yugoslavia. That's now all subdivided. Into the Trecento, which is this green area here, that was hotly disputed. And Trieste, as you can see, fell within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is the reason why there's an awful lot of Vienna Secession-style buildings in Trieste and in a place called Grado, which is just outside Trieste. So this is what it looks like before unification, all this fragmentation. So although there isn't a strong folklore element in terms of the evolution of Liberty style, it is going to very much celebrate the whole concept of Italian unification, which is something none of us did at school. This is the Risorgimento, or resurgence. And you might have seen various museums across Italy actually celebrating this. There's a huge one in Turin, which is very briefly the first capital of the United Italy, Risorgimento. So the leading revolutionaries, who obviously wanted a republic, they don't get that straight off, include the famous Garibaldi. And it was he and Manzini who organized, inevitably, a group entitled Young Italy. And they make their first attempt to break away, on the one hand, from France, and on the other, from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, with the first Italian War of Independence. The Papal States also play their part in this story of unification. So there's Charles Albert, King of Sardinia, but remember he rules over Piedmont and Savoy, so that includes Turin. And essentially it's a factional war. So he's urged by, this is Charles Albert, by the Venetians and the Milanese to attempt to unify Italy, and they rather foolishly declare war on Austria. Inevitably, this first Italian War of Independence fails, but Charles Albert's important in our story, being the father of Victor Emmanuel II. He's Victor Emmanuel II of Savoy and Sardinia, hence, you know, I always confuses me. I always think he should be Victor Emmanuel I of Italy, but he carries, of course, the title from Sardinia. If any of you have been with me to Porto, we go to visit where Charles Albert ended his life in exile. He's a very, very strange character, but it's really weird how sort of history seems to follow me around. So having failed, he abdicates, he goes to Porto, and he will die there, probably of cancer, though nobody's 100% certain. Second War of Independence, and Garibaldi's involved with all of these campaigns, one after the other. He even has a go at the Papal States at one point. Anyway, the Second War of Independence is 1859 and ends in the Battle of Solferino. You're going to go, oh, I've heard that. Somewhere in France, you've probably seen a metro station entitled Solferino. Most importantly, this was France and Sardinia defeating the Austrians. And we have a bit of a carve up after it. So Sardinia at this stage annexes Lombardy from Austria. So we've added Milan, and Sardinia hands Savoy, that's a chunk of Switzerland, and Nice over to France in the Treaty of Turin of 1860. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. We still sort of like Garibaldi's gradually gathering kingdoms together, and the next big defeat is that of Naples. And once the Kingdom of Naples is defeated, this is when you have like the first real obvious combination of states to create a united Italy. So technically, Italy declares it's an independent state in 1861, and Victor Emmanuel is crowned King of Italy. They still have to eventually sort out the Papal States, which is why they can't make Rome capital straight away. And the final Third War of Independence, sorry about this, that's why I had to write it down, is 1866, when the Veneto is taken from Austria. So this is just to show you that even in Italy, it's you know, we don't have all of this mess, do we? You know, Britain is chugging along throughout the 19th century, compared to all the rest of Europe, a very stable place. 1848 doesn't really affect us at all, and we certainly don't go through all of this brouhaha of bringing Great Britain together. We've done that many moons ago. Anyway, because they couldn't take the Papal States immediately into unified Italy, the first capital is briefly Turin. They move it to Florence because they worry about Turin being invaded by the French. It's so close to the border. And then finally, the whole thing is concluded officially in 1871, when Rome is officially designated the capital of the new Kingdom of Italy. It's still a period of enormous unrest, and many people want a republic, you know, not a monarchy. And there's the rise of socialism. And so their very famous riots take place in Milan in 1898. So I don't want you to think that just because Italy is unified, that the political machinations end. They don't really end for many until a republic is declared, because many do not want a monarchy. However, at this stage, Victor Emmanuel is quite an important figure in terms of this idea of a united Italy, because of course this is the national monument. So I always refer to it as the Roman wedding cake. It was a hugely contentious project. It took a long time to build. They had to demolish a lot of medieval buildings to put it there, because I know if you've been to visit, you'll know it's right in the centre of Rome. It was almost like a political statement to put it there. Remember the importance of the papal state. It's now even more, in some ways, even more important because it has a museum to the Risorgimento. There is also the tomb of the unknown warrior, and it's often known as the altar of the fatherland. So it was planned in an incredible neo-classical style. It has a very bad history with the Second World War. Of course, it's the sort of backdrop for many of Mussolini's rallies. So many people have been trying to reclaim it ever since, by really emphasizing it to be about the unknown warrior. So there are various different levels that you can visit, and you get wonderful views out over Rome. And the architect is Giuseppe Sassoni, and it's not even finished in 1911. It's just inaugurated in 1911. They were still building it after the First World War. The Quadrica of Unity is the young lady who is flying off the top of it. That's Victor Emmanuel, another very strange character, who you see enshrined on horseback as a great military leader in front of his monuments. So the next other important thing is, in terms of the politics, the so-called Triple Alliance. So ironically, having been almost part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the country that Italy fears the most is France. And so in 1882, the Triple Alliance, an entente in effect, in fact, it was an alliance to counteract our entente cordiale with France, okay? So this was like two factions in Europe sort of facing off with, as you can see, Italy rather stuck in the middle. So the Triple Alliance was Germany and Austria ganging up with Italy against France, Russia and Britain. I do like the way that Britain is depicted as a bellboy with a pipe. There's a cartoon on the left-hand side entitled The Three Sisters of the Triple Alliance, which again you can see is Italy, Austria and Germany. And then I've got a map, just again reminding you of the complexities of mid-19th century politics. And then I did rather like the sort of image of modernization, as we've got a whole series of Airbuses. Sort of, there's a Zeppelin, and this is about the time, this Coast Guard's about 1914. But I do love the way they're flying German, Austrian and Italian flags. Again, it's this idea of the Triple Alliance. Leads up, of course, to the First World War. So the important thing about the Triple Alliance from the point of view of our story is this explains why there's a strong influence of German Jugendstil and Vienna secession in terms of looking at the architecture. And also many Italian architects will travel to Vienna or to Berlin to get training or simply to go on a travel scholarship. So what I'm trying to show you is that they're looking in that direction rather than towards France. And the other thing too is investment. What you'll find is a lot of Austrian and German and even Swiss entrepreneurs invest in Italy, where I'm afraid they were able to get away with paying lower wages. Okay, so it's that classic thing of the weaker elements in the alliance being exploited. Right, so just to give you a flavour of how unusual Liberty style is. So why is it called Liberty? Well, for a start off, it was originally called the style floral or style floral, but it was very closely associated with Liberty's of Regent Street, which was the largest purveyor in London of what you and I would call contemporary and modern art and design. And so they coined the expression Liberty style from that. But it rather fitted because it all is part of this idea of Italian unification. Though there is no strong nationalism that I can detect in Liberty style. It's more modern in its outlook, using very modern materials like iron and steel for frames, concrete using the new hen and brique system, which was invented by a French engineer, hence the name hen and brique, and was a technique of using sort of a wire netting to sort of reinforce the concrete. Not very good in terms of its longevity, but it was a revolutionary system at the time. And then obviously also glass and ceramics, as we'll see, so leaded glass in the Tiffany style. Ironically, having said that they felt that France was their sort of natural enemy, if anything, I think you can see it's from France that they get their inspiration in terms of the style floral. And the Villa Regari in Pesaro is on your screen for two reasons, because obviously it's nowhere near Turin. It gives you a very good idea of the style straight away. It's one of the most famous Liberty buildings in Italy, and it's at the seaside. So you're going to find that there's a lot of Liberty style throughout Italy at seaside resorts like Pesaro, but also Viareggio, and on the other side at Rimini. And as I've mentioned already, Trieste, which is right on the border, also has an awful lot of Liberty style, but there it's very much tinged with the Vienna Secession. So here's a close-up of the motif in the middle, which has the R for Regari, which is the name of the owner. I just think it's ridiculous. But here is a good close-up of why it's called the style floral. So you can see some Belgian elements going on there. Victor Horta, the rather unusual windows. You can also see, you know, this profusion of floor elements. So style floral or style Liberty. So in terms of searching for the origins for the fantastic, and it is a fantastic brand of Art Nouveau, which you're going to see both in Turin and in Milan, I think we've got to go back to a little known phase of Italian art known as Mannerism. This is located in terms of its era between the end of the High Renaissance and the beginning of the Baroque. So we're talking about the middle to the end of the 16th century. Giuseppe Archiamboldo is renowned, as you know, for these sort of turning human beings into vegetables and flowers. They're slightly disturbing, aren't they? A sort of artistic dystopia. I particularly like the one on the right-hand side, where you can see sort of courgettes and aubergines. Very odd. And then the one on the left-hand side is basically all flowers. So the fantastic nature of Mannerist art may account for the fantastic nature of the Liberty style. You can also look at Mannerist grottos. There was a whole vogue for fantastic gardens. In fact, the Mannerist gardens are in some ways more famous than the architecture, like this one here in the Boboli Gardens in Florence. And when you look inside it, the stalactites, like this, all this accretion of water being carved into fantastic scenes. You're looking there at a pastoral scene, literally sort of cut into this strange porous rock created by, you know, the effect of the water running and creating stalagmites and stalactites. The whole thing is like weird. They would have used tufa, which was from southern Italy, to create this effect. And also it looks like rather weirdly that sort of sculptures are literally emerging out of the surface. It's slightly creepy is what I think I'm trying to say. Even more bizarre and creepy is the Sacro Bosco, or sacred wood, which, or known as the Park of the Monsters, which is all down to its owner, Vinci Orsini, very famous Italian family. And this is in central Italy, in case you want to sort of Google it later and have a look. So this is the stuff of nightmares. So this is a giant elephant it's supposed to be Hannibal, by the way, crossing the Alps. And this is a giant elephant killing a Roman legionary. On the other side, we have what looks to be a dragon fighting with what might be wolves, lions, or dogs. It's fighting, that's the important thing. And here to give you some idea of the size of the Hannibal theme, the elephant throttling the Roman legionary. Here's a sort of a better view of the garden, and it's very, very weird. It has all these strange pathways which you follow, and you pass weird creatures like this sphinx with wings and a snake's tail, and you end up at this, which is where you're supposed to go. You're supposed to go in there, though I don't think I fancy it. And it's Orcus, god of the underworld. And the idea is that you go in there and you hope that you come out again. So I think if we want to look for the sources for why Italian liberty is so unusual, so distinctly Italian, and so fantastical, in the case of the Villa Regari, you've got to look at this sort of Mannerist legacy, because the buildings certainly are fantastic. So the last of my unusual Mannerist buildings is the Villa De La Torre, and this is at Allegrini in the Veneto. And this is a series of fireplaces, you'll be pleased to know. One is supposed to be based on Satan, another is a lion, and the third is a unicorn. Though I'll be perfectly honest, and I couldn't quite decide which one was which, but I think you'll agree that this very much comes under the heading of fantastic. And you can perhaps therefore understand why sculpture is going to be such an important element in Liberty style, particularly in Milan. This is Giuseppe Sommaruga's, one of his most famous villas in Milan. And the young ladies that you're looking at scandalized Milanese society so much that they had to be removed from their original building and hidden in the suburbs. They are known as the women with the buttocks because of their derrieres being so exposed. They are over life size, by the way, or they look it when you're looking at the building. You'll see what I mean in a minute. I'll show you the front. And the building is absolutely covered with strange sculptures, frogs, squirrels, dormice, but it took me a while to work out what was at the bottom of the downpipe, which you're looking at on the right-hand side, because coming out of the bottom of the downpipe is Walrus, or Walrus. Can you see his tusks here and his whiskers? And he appears to be surrounded by sort of ice. The whole thing is really strange, but that's Sommaruga for you. And in terms of interlinking, and particularly the influence of France, it's as well to remember that Sommaruga's cousin was none other than Hector Guimard. Hector Guimard was the most famous architect in Paris of this era. He's the architect of the Paris Metro, the famous Castel Berenger, and they are cousins. It's a weird interlinking. And that again may help to explain Sommaruga, but of course why so many of the architects still look towards France despite the Triple Alliance. So this was built by Sommaruga just on the outskirts, and I mean just on the outskirts of Milan, as a private villa. It's the Romeo Fazioni villa, Romeo as in Alfa Romeo. So you're all thinking to yourself, ah yes, of course Italy is at the forefront of the revolution in transport that occurs at the turn of the century. So this is one of the buildings in Turin, the Casa Mafia, which again was for a very wealthy family. You can see what I mean about how sculpture is going to be a really important component when looking at the buildings in both Turin, but especially in Milan. And you can see here, this is being signed by the artist, and is in fact, it's in plaster. So it's molded sculptural ornamentation. And I should say also with the Sommaruga villa that that's not carved, it's also molded, made out of litho cement, one of the new materials that the Italians favoured. You can see here, Alofitti is the sculptor involved. So my reason really for choosing Turin is the fact that it was really presented as the most modern city in Italy in 1902, when Victor Emmanuel chose to have it as, you know, this is the centerpiece for this idea of a unified, modernizing Italy. The first Exposition Internazionale Art Decorativa Moderna, and this is the famous poster for it, which, as you can see, clearly was influenced by French posters of the era, particularly those by Musha. And the designer is Bistolfi, if I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that almost right. And you can easily get reproductions of this on the net. It's very famous. So I mentioned that Turin and Milan were at the forefront of the car industry. So it's Alfa Romeo in Milan and it's Fiat in, of course, Turin. So this is the original Fiat factory, and you'll find this near the site of the exposition, which is in Valentino Park. So we're in that part of Sansovino. So I'll show you a map of Turin in a minute, but it's all divided into districts. But we're in the area of the park, the Valentino Park, where the exhibition of 1902 was held. And this is Alfredo Premoli, who is the architect. It's not outrageously Art Nouveau, as you can see, or Liberty style, but it really comes through in the metalwork of the gates, where you can see a horta or a guillemot style whiplash in the metalwork at the top. And there are a couple of buildings in Turin by Premoli, which are typically Liberty style, in the sense that they are using stucco. They like these compass scribed elements. This is one of the signatures of Fenoglio, as you'll see later, but these sort of compass inscribed lines seen particularly at the bottom on the left, on the right hand side. And these sort of stylized floral elements that have been squared off, which you could say was very much the influence of Mackintosh and Vienna. So please look at the date of this, 1906. By that stage, they will have seen works by Joseph Maria Olbrecht. He's the great Viennese architect, and they will certainly have seen Mackintosh, as you'll see in a tick. So here's a couple of close-ups just to show you what I mean about these compass scribed lines, which are very much a feature of the Turin Liberty style. And there's an interesting interplay of curvy linear and linear that always reminds me of both Mackintosh and the Viennese artists and designers. And the most famous, of course, Fiat site in Turin is the Lingotto, the amazing factory built, as you can see, right in the middle of the First World War, though initially they were doing more for the war effort than making Fiat cars. The architect of this is Matteo Trucco, and the most famous feature of it is this, the famous ramp. So the cars were tested on the racetrack on the roof. This is why the Lingotto to this day is really famous. Yes, it did feature in the Italian job. And yes, it has been repurposed by Enzo Piano. And I'm just showing you the ramp, because the ramp brought the cars down from the roof. So they went up through the building being made, they went out onto the roof to be tested, and then they came down the ramp at the end. So this is just to remind you, when we say that Turin was at the forefront of modern Italy, that I'm not making it up. So for 1902, Turin 1902, which I think is the real high point of the modern art movement. As you can see, you were not allowed to show anything that was historicist. So only original products that show a decisive tendency towards aesthetic renewal of form will be admitted. This is the mantra. Neither mere imitations of past styles, historicism, nor industrial products not inspired by an artistic sense will be accepted. In other words, you had to have industrial products that had been designed in effect by an artist. So it's that idea of allying art and industry. The front, well, this is the main entrance. A lot of where it says salve in Latin, means welcome. And it was clearly inspired by the portal of the first Darmstadt exhibition. This portal was designed by Joseph Maria Olbrecht, and this, of course, is all to do with Ernst Ludwig's campaign to create a sort of modern acropolis in his city of Darmstadt, which would to celebrate modern art. So this is the first Darmstadt exhibition of 1901. You can see how very similar the entrance is at Turin, only 1 year later in 1902. And all the buildings for Turin 1902 were designed by one architect. Raimondo da Aronco is our architect. Again, Aloeti is our sculptor. We've met him already. He was on, his work was on the front of a building in Turin, the Maffei Palace. And our poster designer, of course, was also the painter at the exhibition. So that's one of the many postcards that you can still acquire on eBay. This is the central part of the exhibition. This is the main hall. I think you can see what I mean about the exuberance of the sculpture. And da Aronco himself, born in Undine, there is 1 or 2 buildings in his hometown, including his absolutely outrageous tomb in the necropolis. And he is going to make his name in Istanbul, of all places, as I'll show you in a minute. So here's shows you the full length of the building, because you had a central pavilion and then galleries to either side. The gallery on the right-hand side was for France. We'll see it in a minute. So here's the central section. None of this survives, of course. It was all temporary. So, you know, using disposable materials, but particularly this, a lot of the figures are not carved out of stone. They're this litho cement material. And so we can get some idea of the interior by looking at this postcard, which shows you that the grand vestibule was lit by these rather beautifully shaped windows, which don't appear to have had coloured leaded glass. But running immediately above was this rather magnificent frieze, sort of Italian Elysian fields, as you can see, which is all attributed to da Aronco. However, there were plenty of skilled craftsmen in Italy. For the metalwork, it's Alessandro Mazzucatelli, and for the Tiffany-style windows, these are largely down to a Milanese company, Giovanni Beltrami. Many of these craftsmen were also very skilled designers and artists in their own right. It's that idea, like Emile Gallet, of aligning arts and industry. This company, Giovanni Beltrami, worked with a whole series of, again, very talented artists, Giovanni Buffa being one of them. I'll show you one of his most famous designs in a minute. The amazing skylight on the left-hand side is at San Pellegrino Termai. San Pellegrino as in the water, which was a very important spa. Much of the architecture in the Liberty style. So both of those windows on the left-hand side are from San Pellegrino, but the amazing skylight on the right-hand side is actually in Rome. Here it is. It's known as the Velario, and is in the House of Representatives in the Montecitorio Palace in Rome. And as you can see, it's a tour de force of stylized ribbons in sort of Tiffany style. It's very large, as you can see. If I just go back, you can see what I mean about how large it is. This is by Beltrami. And the most famous design, really, the one that you see if you immediately go onto the internet for Beltrami, is the design by Giovanni Buffa for Medusa, which is in the Wolfsonian, which is this magnificent museum and art gallery devoted to Liberty style, just outside Genoa, the Wolfsoniana. It's an offshoot of the Wolfsonian Foundation in Miami, which is where you go to see in America some of the very best decorative arts of, well, in fact, of the world. I mean, the collections are not just focused on one country. The Wolfson family collected all Art Nouveau and across a wide spectrum. So back to Turin 1902. We're back to one of the other buildings on the exhibition site. This is the Palace of the Fine Arts, Belle Arti. The postcards are what you and I would call artistic impressions, not exactly how they were built. These were obviously, the postcards were produced way before the exhibition opened. So they're like the artists' mock-ups for the building. So they were toned down often when they were actually constructed. So I'm showing you the postcard, which was the artist's vision, including a very large peacock over the doorway, and the building as realized. Still quite fantastic, as you can see. The Belle Arti, the Palace of Fine Arts at Turin 1902. And we know that Duronco is particularly well known for the pavilion that celebrated photography, which has got like pylons to either side. As you can see, artistic photography, it's at the top. And this is the pavilion for Austria. I think you can definitely see the hand of Ulbrich there, though by 1902, Ulbrich had left for Darmstadt. Right, to go back to Duronco very briefly, he has a really interesting career. He's chief palace architect to the Ottoman Sultan in Istanbul for 16 years. Unfortunately, very little of his work in Istanbul has survived, but I'm just going to show you a couple of them to give you an idea of just how the buildings he created for Turin 1902 might have looked. Here are my close-up of the central pavilion. You can see again the importance of the sculpture. These sort of nymphs appeared to be bacchantes dancing. So he is a good example, Duronco, a good example of the Triple Alliance, the impact of these links with Austria had. He trained at Graz, which is in Austria, and he is very influenced by the Austrian succession, perhaps much more so than his Italian compatriots, as you'll see. So this is one of the rare surviving buildings of his in Istanbul. I'm not going to attempt to do all of the translations there, but essentially it's a tomb. Though this particular example, as you can see, is quite beautifully preserved. It's an interesting, it mixes in, as you can see, some very obvious Ottoman decorative features in that sort of triangular zigzag pattern in the center. And this is in another part of Istanbul, a fountain by Duronco that survived, with again that sort of ziggurat shape in the center. The blue on it is because it is illuminated and different colors are shone on it. I went for the blue one. I confess I haven't seen these in the flesh. And this could be a fantastic Liberty style building in Istanbul. This is the Botta apartment, but as you can see, it's in a terrible state, basically derelict. And perhaps the reason why it's in such a foreign, alien style to Turkey, it was created for Jean Botta, who was a Dutchman who worked as the Sultan's tailor. Anyway, I thought you'd be rather fascinated to know that even Istanbul has a smattering of Liberty style. Perhaps the most obvious elements are in the decorative portions, the inevitable female mascarons, stylized ribbon-like elements, and flowers everywhere, as you can see around the doorway. But I'm afraid to say the building is, to all intents and purposes, derelict. And you can see here in Duronco's designs for the Imperial Stables in Istanbul, again, that sort of very Austrian element coming over in sort of reworking of neoclassical forms. But because it's the stables, please note the rather lovely horseshoe shape to the doorway. So his legacy in Turin is, I'm afraid, quite limited. Right by Valentino Park, where the exhibition was held, you will find Duronco's Villa Chiavelli, and it's actually on a road named in his honor. And you can see there's a bit of Swiss chalet. It's very Austrian in terms of its architectural forms. There's some sort of very obvious Austro-German vernacular creeping into that roof line, sort of roof line that you might find in the Italian Alps. As soon as I saw this, I was immediately struck by its similarity to the bubbles that you will see on the buildings at Bad Neuheim. That's another part of the Darmstadt experiment, a great spa created by Ernst Ludwig. It looks almost like bubbles, doesn't it, in flowing water? And this is looking at it head on, my Swiss chalet look. But there's the lady's head with laurels creeping out from behind, which again is much more overtly golden secession style, as I like to call it. And the only thing that really survives from Turin 1902 in the Valentino Park is the fountain, with a rather nice, again, Art Nouveau lady here, with she's got pan pipes, as you can see, and that's a strange goat. The reason that it's strange and looks rather like a grotto is, yes, it's made out of this litho cement, stone cement. And this is really very much in a historicist style, as you can see. But this is really the only element. It already had been built and was included in the layout of Turin 1902. So just very quickly to go back to the French and the Dutch, the grand vestibule is on your left, and you can see the pavilions which were given over to individual countries at Turin 1902. This is just to remind you that this is one of Charles William Mackintosh's high points. So he participated in a big exhibition in Vienna in 1900 and was actually there for about 5 weeks. We definitely know that he was in Turin because we know that they all had dinner together. There was this amazing, I'd love to be in a fly on the wall, an amazing dinner. Ernst Ludwig came in for coffee and cigars at the end. He's Darmstadt. Walter Crane was there, Brian Newbury was there, Mackintosh was there. I would love to have been able to earwig on their conversation. But the important thing is that everybody in Europe knew about Mackintosh by 1900, and they certainly all knew about him by 1902. They also knew about Francis McNair and his wife, Frances MacDonald. So this is a reconstruction of the McNair section at Turin 1902. The banners are marking the entrance of the Scottish section, which were designed by Mackintosh. The catalogue was actually partly penned by Francis Newbury. That, of course, is Mackintosh's mentor. The frontispiece to the Scottish section was by Jessie Marion King. And then just to remind you that they were seeing everything here, the other programme, the other catalogue, is the Dutch section with the very obvious influence of Jan Turop. And I love the work of Jessie Marion King, so I couldn't resist putting in a book cover in the bottom right-hand corner. These are all shown by Mackintosh at Turin 1902. This is the famous rose boudoir. The cabinet has survived and is in Vienna. The theme of the pink and the white rose, that's in private hands. You'll see one of the chairs in Glasgow. They have beautiful stenciled decoration on their backs, which are like sailcloth fabric. So everybody knew about Mackintosh and his roses. And this is Peter Behrens' contribution to Turin 1902. This is the famous entrance to the German section. When Behrens had been working at Darmstadt, he was still working at Darmstadt in 1902, but he's about to leave and spread the Jugendstil style. He wanted the Jugendstil style to be taken up as the German national style. So again, it was an interweaving of local, national and international, and also coming up with a modern style that was quintessentially German, hence the term Jugendstil. So I want you to realize how easy it was for my architects in both Milan and in Turin to see works of a comparable character, modern architecture, really from across the world, which is why I say I think it's the high point. There's nothing like that at Paris 1900, though you'll always be told that that's the high point of Art Nouveau. From my point of view, Turin is the high point. In terms of the Italians themselves, well, in terms of interior design, the high point was provided by Carlo Bugatti, who again, I'm afraid technically is based in Milan. This was his fantastic, now you remember I was saying to you about how fantastical Liberty's style is. You can't get any more fantastical than Bugatti. He mixes African with Japanese, medieval, Oriental. It's incredible. And this is his snail-inspired salon, so that you might get a better sense of the snail looking at it at this end. And it's you know, it's a banquette. You know, it's a built-in, I don't know who would ever build it in permanently, but it's a built-in couch with independent chairs around the table. So there's the independent chair. It's covered in vellum, in case you're wondering what's going on there, which could then be painted and tooled and covered often with Japanese devices. Just the throne shows some obvious influences of African art. So here he is, Carlo Bugatti. Yes, he is, as in the famous Bugatti cars, but that's Ettore Bugatti. There's another Bugatti, who's Rembrandt Bugatti, who sadly commits suicide and who was a renowned sculptor at the turn of the century. And this is Carlo Bugatti's absolutely nutty furniture, which was shown at Turin 1902. It is quite fantastical, isn't it? Here's another image from 1902. I'm not actually sure what I'm looking at here in terms of its function, but I think it's part of a bedroom suite that he designed. And the foreground element is therefore a dressing table. And on the wall, we have a sort of cabinet with a mirror. Here's a mirror a la Bugatti. You can see what I mean about this. Some Moorish elements in there, some Japanese, you name it, there's an element. And here's another chair that looks like a throne that's come straight out of Africa. Again, it's covered with vellum, which is then tooled and painted or dyed, often with bamboo motifs, crane motifs. It's a very, very odd mixture. A lot of them are very unusual in terms of their three-legged, or in the case of this one here, which looks, it's very anthropomorphic, doesn't it? Is there some Egyptian in that? The main thing is that he really is stretching the sort of whole concept of functional furniture. I think we've gone way beyond the functional here. So you can see here what I mean about the bamboo element, the cranes on the cabinet on the right-hand side, which also shows the influence of Moorish architecture. There's some Alhambra in there. And this is the sofa that goes with the throne that we saw a few minutes ago. And in Cleveland, you'll find this coffee table, though I'm not sure that he's responsible for the coffee set that's on top of it. But again, I wanted just to emphasize the fantastical nature of Bugatti furniture. The main theme throughout this piece is the grasshopper or cigale, which is what you're looking at on its feet, or sabot. Then there's Eugenio Corti. He was even more important in some ways because he worked directly with architects creating Gesamtkunstwerk, totally integrated interiors. He produces some of his finest furniture for Sommaruga. Should you be lucky enough to find a piece, it's all marked. He's sometimes called the goldsmith of furniture because he uses so many exotic materials for inlaying. So copper, pewter, silver. It's incredibly, again, sort of like almost related to boule from the Baroque period. And like Bugatti, he'll also cover the pieces with vellum that can be tooled, painted. And, you know, there's this strong Japanese element, as you can see, in his designs. He too is based in Milan. So two cabinets by Eugenio Corti. So the one on the left-hand side is more obviously Gothic, with some Japanese and some sort of Ottoman thrown in, some Moorish elements. And the one on the right-hand side, stained green with, as you can see, glass panels and rather beautiful floral motifs. Well, that is more obviously influenced by what is going on in the style floral. And he did produce pieces which were more I think, I won't say practical, but certainly less fantastical. The bottom black and white photograph shows his display at Paris 1900. In the Carraro collection, we have an entire ensemble. The chair, as you can see in the photograph with its table, they're actually, as you can see, part of this display for Paris 1900. That chair looks much more in the style of Hector Guimard, with its sort of rather unusual, almost kidney-shaped back. But again, you can see, you know, it's inlaid with all these beautiful materials, in this case, mother of pearl. There were more commercial manufacturers who were slightly less outlandish than Bugatti. So this is in the Wolfsonian collection at Genoa. This is Luigi Fontana and Brothers, an entire interior. And I love the carpet, the boiserie. This is very gallet, isn't it? The Pavilion sofa is very gallet, and a bit of Guimard thrown in for good luck. But what I really like is the doorway, which may be, well, it was definitely designed by Fontana. It's made up of glass beads, which is the technique that I have come across in Barcelona. So you can see here, this fits more, doesn't it, into international French, Belgian Art Nouveau styling in the use of those flowing lines. Remember always the connection between Sommaruga and Hector Guimard.